Hi, everybody. Hi, Karen and Mike, and thanks for saying you can hear us. Thank you, Karen, for being a trooper, too. It's pretty ironic, isn't it, that we're here to teach you how to do great virtual presentations, and we start out with just the suck factor off the charts.
Well, it's a catastrophic failure from StreamYard, so our deepest apologies, because they are definitely gone, and that's what we were planning to use. But I want to commend my team. I can't even believe how calm, everyone's calm. And I think that comes from doing this for a living for people. So, wow.
Yeah, that's true. It's not like we've never had a technical difficulty with an event before, but thank you everybody for rolling it with it. And we're here now and live. That's how you know we're live.
Yeah. So I really, deep apologies. We really are big at starting on time. And I'm sure many of you are kind of tired of this format and today tested our own patience for it. But I think we've all been trapped in really terrible presentations and meetings. And it's been such a privilege to watch Patti write this book. You know, when Shelter in Place first started, there were people who were like, we're experts at this. I'm like, no, you know, Patti flipped all of our workshops to virtual. My consulting team flipped the largest events in the world to virtual. So we really do have deep-seated knowledge. And Patti not only ran product and sales and is on the executive team as a strategist, she wrote a book, and not a lot of people would have the resolve to do that. So I want her to jump in and share insights that she has, that she learned from the book. So take it away, Patricia.
For sure. Well, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everybody. As I said, there's definitely a suck factor to virtual presentations today. I mean, they're a part of our everyday lives, but most of them aren't great, sometimes because of technical difficulties, but also for other reasons. We did a survey, Nancy knows this, just a few months back, of over 500 people, knowledge workers, and they gave, on average, on a scale of 1 to 10, virtual presentations a score of 5.97. I mean, if you're thinking of that scale, it's maybe halfway up that grading curve, which essentially is an F. And that means that it's a bad experience for audiences. And we believe audiences deserve better. We believe you deserve better. And so what we wanted to do today is share tips on how to make virtual presentations better. So one of the first things that I explored in the book is the challenges with virtual presentations. And there are a few of them. One of the first ones is the one we just experienced today, which is the technology. Technology can be a barrier even when it works well, because, right, Nancy, it's basically like a wall between you and me and our viewers right now. It's not the same as being in person, right? You experienced being in person recently for the first time in a while, and that feels really different to presenting virtually, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was, I was kind of frozen. I got used to talking to a virtual team and looking in a camera.
Right. And in some ways that technology is our friend. It makes it easier for us to reach a lot of people simultaneously, but it also dilutes our impact. And that was one of the first challenges that I named for virtual presentations, just how it makes us a tinier, flatter version of our real selves. Another big challenge is distraction. And you probably all are experiencing this right now, because I'm guessing that you're watching this presentation on a device that has some other app or some other window open. Am I right? Is anybody multitasking right now? It's okay to admit it. Maybe you're reading your email or you've got something else. Guilty, always, definitely guilty as charged. It's the reality, especially in our busy lives today where we're under pressure to get a lot of things done. So you wouldn't be the first person, you wouldn't be the first audience to be trying to do other things while we're giving you a presentation. And so that is something that you can surmount, actually, if you're really intentional with how you build your content, how you build your visuals, and how you deliver your messages. You can draw audiences back from those sources of distraction, lure them away from their inboxes. And we'll talk a little bit about some techniques for that. And the third challenge is disconnection. And I feel like this is a deeper challenge with virtual communication. It's an emotional challenge. It's kind of a spiritual challenge in some ways, because this technology can make us feel more isolated if we're just staring at our devices all day. And there are ways that you can also make your audiences feel more connected to you. And we'll talk about those today as well. I see some hands raised, and I see a question. Well, the question is really more of a comment that a distraction is eating breakfast, which I can relate to. Nancy, you got your hand raised.
I was trying to, we are competent. I was trying to look at who had their hand raised, and instead I raised my hand. So that's awesome.
She's just testing the technology, making sure it works this time.
No.
Totally fair.
But we are taking questions during it. And if you put it in the Q&A part, we'll check them out and I'll try to moderate them and pop questions over to Patti.
So one of the things that we wanted to share with you today is a methodology that we use at Duarte, which also can help you make your virtual presentations more effective. And we call it the Duarte method, named after, well, Nancy and Mark are our co-founders. But Nancy, I would love for you to just say a little bit about the Duarte method, what it means to you, how you think of it, and then I'll unpack it a little bit for people.
Yeah, so it was actually comes rooted not so much from me as it is from the work that we've done for the most amazing thought leaders and brands and most beloved executives. And so it's a bit of a lockup about what you need to be able to influence others. And we call it the Duarte method. So it has story, it has visuals, and it has delivery. So it's like, what is your content? How do you visualize it? And then how do you show up? And if, as a Venn diagram, the very center is empathy, and everything when you communicate should be empathy first. And this model was in my very first book, Slideology. I never realized I'd go on to write a bunch of other books too. But it's called Three Legs of a Stool, the Duarte method. So that's how it kind of started.
And then when I joined Duarte, I added a fourth leg to turn it from a stool into a chair. And that fourth leg is strategy, because I think that's where great communication starts, is essentially knowing your goal. What do you want to achieve with that communication? And then building a plan to get there. So that's the first step in the process of making a better virtual presentation for your audience. Like Nancy said, is to be empathetic toward the people that you're presenting to. And one of the first ways to be empathetic is just acknowledge that they're distracted, like we've already talked about, and know that it's on you to make the content, make the visuals, make the delivery a lot more interesting for them. But another important part of planning for your virtual presentation is deciding what type of virtual presentation to use in the first place. And it's definitely not a good idea to just repurpose the same presentation you would stand and deliver in person. It needs to be adapted to the interactive nature of virtual medium. So the way that I describe it in the book, there's 3 types of virtual presentations, and choosing the right one depends on your goal for the audience. So in the Duarte method, what we teach in our workshops as a first step is to imagine or analyze where your audience is today in their thinking and feeling about your idea, and then where you want to move them to by the time you're done with your presentation. And the gap between that move from, move to is the journey you have to take your audience on. And if that gap is really tiny, you're likely to agree, they're likely to agree with your ideas, then your job is a little bit easier and you can give more of a standard presentation. But if that gap is really big, you're going to have to do more work to persuade them. And that will require a different type of presentation, where you basically bring your audience along with you as you're going through your ideas and making it more interactive. So the first kind of presentation that you can choose in terms of the format options that you have is the linear presentation, a linear virtual presentation. So that's kind of like a monologue, if you want to think about it that way. It's the presenter making their case without much interruption from the audience. And I actually have a graphic here, and let me just bring that up while I'm talking to you. So the first type of presentation, as I said, is this virtual linear presentation. That is really a one-way interaction with your audience. Very low interaction, might have a Q&A at the end, a very contained, small amount of time, but there isn't generally a lot of give and take between the presenter and the audience. And that's best for those situations where you don't think there's going to be a lot of resistance and you just want to get your ideas out, make sure that people understand your point of view, but you don't really need to engage them a lot to bring them along or to overcome resistance. The second type of virtual presentation is what we call an interactive presentation. It's more like what we're doing here today, Nancy and I. We're having more of a dialogue. There's a give and take between us, but there's also a give and take between us and you, because you're asking us questions, you're making comments in an open chat forum. And so you have more of a voice in this kind of presentation. It's more of a two-way dialogue. And my hope is that because you're more involved in it, you feel like it's made more of an impact on you. It's actually been more helpful in achieving your goals, and we end up more aligned by the end. And then the third type of virtual presentation is collaborative. And that is more like a workshop or a working session. That kind of presentation is really multi-way interaction between the speaker and the audience, where you're essentially co-creating the message. You're co-creating a solution to a problem by the end. That's high degree of interaction, a great way to get people bought into your idea, but it takes more effort, takes more time. So you have to choose wisely. What's the right format to use for that particular type of situation that you're in?
Yeah,
so a little bit of how do I think about it, Nancy?
Yeah, so I think it's important that once the format is picked, then you need to start crafting your content. So can you share a little bit more about how content is impacted, or how it needs to be created differently for virtual presentations? Because I think the biggest competitor to a virtual presentation is someone's inbox, right? You have to be more interesting than their inbox, because people are going to want to process email while they're listening to you. So breaking it down into like yummy bits of Halloween candy is really important. So I want to hear you kind of expound on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges besides distraction is just the shortening attention span. People are less able to stay focused for long periods of time. At this point, no more than 10 minutes can we stay focused. But a lot of times our attention is actually flitting around multiple times within that 10 minutes. So really you only have a couple of minutes to grab your audience's attention. And then you have to keep doing that throughout your presentation to lure them away from their inbox with that little tasty, yummy little trail of candy, like Nancy said. And so one way to think about how to create that yummy stream of consumable content for your audience in a virtual presentation is to chunk it. So this idea of content chunking really starts with thinking about the overall narrative of your presentation in a few big chunks that are often rooted in storytelling principles. The most old and compelling sort of structure for communication is a story, and it follows a 3-act structure, as Nancy described in Resonate. She knows this better than I do. You could probably describe the 3-act structure off the top of your head.
You want me to do that?
Why not?
There's 3 acts. In the first act, usually there is a kind of a likable hero. Usually they're flawed in some way, but they have a goal. And something happens that throws them in the middle of the story. And this is kind of that messy middle where your audience is going to contend and grapple with your idea, because they got to get over mindsets. They need to get over roadblocks that they're throwing in front of their, between you and your idea. And then ultimately it ends in a way where it lures people to join you, to join your movement, to join your idea. And so that's the resolution of the 3-act structure.
And the same principles apply to your virtual presentation. In that beginning, you've got to really draw them in, like the inciting incident in the story, state a problem in a compelling way, share a surprising statistic or an engaging story to draw people in right away. We shared that statistic about the rating of virtual presentations on a scale of 1 to 10. That frames the problem, right? And then in the middle, you want to use contrast, which is what's found in great story presentations, by chunking the information in your virtual presentation into subtopics and using different formats for the content. Sometimes it's statistics, sometimes it's stories, other types of content that can create a little bit more interest, but also small bites. Very similar to what we're doing today, where we're sort of skipping across several different topics during the course of our conversation, following that Duarte method. And so every time we change topic, hopefully it's more interesting and engaging to you than if we were to talk about one topic for the entire hour. So having variety in the topics, as well as variety in the kinds of formats that topic is presented in, will keep your audience more engaged. And we'll talk about the closing when we get to the close. You always want to give people a call to action. So we've got a call to action for you and some resources to help you up your virtual presenting game. So that's content, just in terms of the raw way of thinking about how to structure your content and keep it interesting and consumable, but also interactions are a way to keep your audience engaged. And so there were 3 fundamental types of interactions that you can also use in your virtual presentations. I like 3, as you can probably tell. And the first type of interaction is what I would call simple. A simple interaction is just to check the pulse of the people that you're speaking to. So that what's really common in virtual presentations is the poll or a Q&A function. We'll pause in just a second and take some of your questions. And those are pretty low effort for you and low effort for the presenter to do that kind of quick check, or even just a reaction. As I was watching some of you comment on LinkedIn version of our stream with that heart and thumbs up and thumbs down, that's a quick way for you to tell us how you're feeling about how things are going with the presentation. Then there are moderate interactions. Those involve a little more effort on both our parts. For instance, framing up a specific question or comment in the chat. Actually, in some cases in our workshops, we invite people to annotate slides, to draw on them, or visualize ideas themselves. That takes a little more work, but you can get some deeper insights about how people are feeling about your idea by using those interaction types. And then the third is a lot more involved, and that's the complex interactions. And those are the ones that use kind of all of our communication tools. So for instance, when we ask people to unmute, turn their camera on and share feedback or join in a breakout room, you get deeper insights. You also build more connection with the audience and between audience members, but it also takes more work. And you want to be careful not to ask people to do one of those more difficult interactions too early in your presentation or in your communication, because sometimes it can feel overwhelming to them. So you don't want to send them into a breakout room right away. Otherwise, they're just going to be staring at each other or keeping their cameras off, and it'll be awkward. So warm them up with small bites, small interactions.
Yeah, I think it's good that the interactive part was grouped with the content part, because that takes planning. It's not like it's just going to magically become interactive. So I thought that was great. Now moving on to visuals, kind of in the Duarte method. So I bet visuals need to be different. I know in Slideology, we call it a glance test, right? Where you should be able to take your eyes off the speaker for just a minute, get the concepts of the visuals, and put your attention right back. So you think it's still true that people should only have skimmable slides? So give us what your insights are around how visuals need to be modified.
For sure. It's even more true than it ever was before that slides need to be skimmable, like you said, and so skimmable that people don't have to squint when they're looking at your slides on what is likely a smaller device, right? When we used to present in big ballrooms or large meeting rooms and our slides were on giant screens, there was more space to visualize our ideas. But when people are watching your presentation online, they might be watching it on just a laptop screen, which is certainly smaller than a big monitor or a meeting room, or even on iPad or some kind of tablet device, or as small as a mobile phone. And that means that the screen is going to be that much smaller, the text will be that much smaller and that much harder to read. So more than ever, it's important to simplify, to strip back the content in your slides and give them a makeover with what we call a spa treatment for slides. And the spa is the first half of a method that Nancy described in this slide design online course called Space, which is pretty cool. And this more you can learn about it in that course. But the simple first steps that you can use when you're paring back your slides for a virtual presentation are to first simplify, cut the clutter, take off all the unnecessary content, get really clear about what is the one main idea that your audience needs to take away quickly from that slide, and pare all the content down so that you're emphasizing that one main point, the spa treatment in this case, and then plan how you're going to arrange information on the slides so that it draws or communicates a really clear hierarchy, makes it very apparent immediately to your audience how you're supporting that main idea with your supporting messages. So in this case, there's a visual hierarchy to this slide that makes those supporting messages really clear. And then finally, you want to accentuate, use design choices like the typography, the color palette, or even iconography, for instance, to draw attention to the main ideas. In this case, simplify, plan, and accentuate, or bigger and bolder than the subtext there. Now, before we jump on, I know there's a couple other topics, but I'm seeing lots of questions. So I'm going to just pop in the Q&A pane and see what questions we've got. So Martin says, in my last interview, I mentioned the idea of making a greater performative effort when communicating virtually. We're actually going to talk about that next, because delivery is the fourth leg of that virtual presenting chair. And so we'll talk a little bit about the ways that you can use your voice, your facial expressions, and your gestures to bring your ideas alive for your audience and make them feel a stronger sense of connection with you when you're in a virtual room together. So hold that thought. Kenny asks, is there a difference between presenting for a live audience versus creating a presentation that would be viewed later, like for instance, in an online course? What would work better in one versus the other? Well, that's an interesting question, because we've had some debate even amongst Nancy and I about the pros and cons of pre-recording presentations and delivering them live. And so, Nancy, you may want to speak about how you present differently when you're presenting for a pre-recorded.
These live ones, they're kind of more fun to watch, right? Because if something really gets screwed up, you get to kind of realize that we're all in the same boat. When something's going to be recorded for a really big audience and it's going to have a lot of legs or it's really high stakes, we actually hire a full video crew. We have a audio specialist video. The background's amazing. I get a makeup artist. It's awesome. So it's like, depends on what's going on. So I think live, rough cut, all hands kinds of things. But if you host an industry event and your brand is the one attracting a lot of people to your presentations, those have to have a really high production quality. The next question's interesting. I'll just ask the questions, Patty. I'll take this one on from Dr. Hafer. It says, how do you feel about showing a full view of the presenter during the slide presentation? Which actually we should do right now, because we're not really talking about these slides. But our producer is missing because we were going to use a different tool. But it says, I'm a teaching professor who supplements in-class presentations with short video presentations when students need extra help or reinforcement. If desirable, how can you do that, since Keynote and PowerPoint don't lend themselves to that mode?
Well, it really depends on the tools that you're using. I see Lorenzo commenting that OBS is complicated. This is true. For the average bear or a girl or boy, the tools are developing more and more capabilities to be able to do picture-in-picture, for instance, to be able to juxtapose, your video and your slides or graphics with you. But it's challenging. Now, somebody says sound is gone. Can somebody raise your hand if you're actually hearing the sound? Okay,
the audio?
I feel lots. Okay, thank you. So sound is working. Great. Thanks for that confirmation. So in the book, I talk about these three potential views that you have available to you. And one for sure is to share just one stream of information at the same time. So that could be just your video or just your slides. In those cases where the slide text is it has to be dense because it's a diagram or chart that's really difficult to pare back, then you want to share that as your primary view, and you can keep your video off or minimized. In other cases, it makes sense to use the main view as just you as a speaker, your video, which is what Nancy and I are doing right now, because we want you all to see our faces and our gestures, especially as we start to talk about delivery techniques in a virtual medium. And then when you go into the second kind of view that's available to you, the concurrent, is what we were doing earlier, where you can see the video and the slide together. And the upside of that is it's easier for your audience to stay focused on both streams of information at the same time. They can see your face, they can see the slides, but it is more work when they're in separate windows. And so in that ideal world, the better scenario is that fused view, as I described in the book, but it's what some have mentioned, OBS and Prezi Video, other platforms like that, make it easier to basically your graphics and you to be overlaid, but it takes work and practice for you as a presenter to get familiar with that technology.
It also has has a higher probability of failing too. Like that's what we had where the graphics were going to be fused and everything.
Mhm.
But there was a technology failure. It's interesting.
So
Yeah, let's keep going with the content. You have such good content. I'll keep looking at the Q&A. I think you covered really well the actual visuals, but there's other visual things that are going on when things are fused, right? We're in our home. I didn't hire a sales guy once because he dolled up, like he had the suit and tie going on, but he had like, his kitchen was a mess behind him. He had a KitchenAid. It looked like it had just flicked all over everything. Another guy, I'm like, okay, show up like you're presenting to a public CEO. Okay, you got the big sales gig and you're going to show up to a public CEO. And he had like a lumberjack plaid shirt that was 10 sizes too small and the buttons were opening and little hair was popping out. I was like, wow, I think you make an impression in this environment. So I would love you to tell us more about what else needs to be designed. It's not really only about the slides.
right, exactly. So this graphic is showing some other layers of information that you should be intentional about designing when you're working on your virtual presentation. It's what we call the 3 layers of information in a virtual presentation, or TriCast, because of the 3 layers that you're essentially broadcasting at the same time, even if you don't realize it. So one of those layers is you, right? It's me, it's Nancy, it's what we're wearing, it's what we're saying. We're the primary delivery vehicle for our ideas, but we also have other delivery vehicles available to us. That second layer is your graphics. So what we were just talking about, the slides that you're projecting, or it might be hand sketched graphics. It might even be just the gestures that you're using to signify ideas. But essentially, those are the graphics that reinforce what you're saying, help people see what you're saying so they can better understand it. But the third layer, and I think this is fascinating, that a lot of people don't give attention to, is your background. It's the environment that you're sitting in, which during the pandemic, when we all had to race home and throw together some kind of semblance of a remote working space, wasn't always ideal. Sometimes we did have to take a meeting from our kitchen or from our living room or from a cloffice, like our producer is today. It's a reality. And so that's another choice that we have, is the environment that we present from and what we want it to say about us, how we want it to support what we're saying, or give you the audience an impression of who we are and what's important to us. And this can lead to a pretty contentious topic. I've already been in a few debates internally and externally about the idea of fake backgrounds. And again, if you're using amazing high-end TV production quality technology and you're very familiar with how to use tools like OBS and others, you can use fake backgrounds that in a way that doesn't really look that fake. But it takes a lot of trial and error, in my experience and our team's experience, to get the lighting just right, to get the green screen to be super smooth, to choose a background that contrasts well enough between you and the actual fake image so that it looks as crisp and as realistic as possible. And more often than not, people struggle to get that right. And so I would advocate that you try to use a real environment more often than not, unless you really are technically adept at making a green screen setup look good.
Yeah,
Nancy, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, it was interesting, is that, and you need to look at it. Like, I actually had my niece come over and she's like, this looks terrible. And she redid this for me. And then last night when we were practicing, it's like I had a giraffe and it looked like I had a unicorn coming out the top of my head. Patty had like a red graphic with a big circle, so it looked like she was Jesus, so you just need to make sure somebody objectively looks at your space and tells you that is not suitable for camera and helps you rearrange it or helps you bring out distraction, because the background is similar to slides. You need to make sure they're focused on the right thing, and if you have some big glaring thing, it really does make a difference. So kind of design all of the layers from what you wear to your slides to the background. So yeah,
and I see some questions about that and a lot of comments as well. It's again a hot topic and a real challenge for people, especially when they can't change their environment or they don't have many options for what the setup can look like. Then for low stakes team meetings, casual conversations, everyday interactions, for sure, it's okay to use the fake background or the blurred background if people are asking about that. Again, if those are people who know you well and there's not a question about your credibility or capability, it's not a high stakes situation, then the backdrop can be a little more real, a little more raw, or possibly even, again, you can get away with a fake background. So I'm not judging my colleagues when they blur their background or they're using a fake background in a meeting with me in a one-on-one. Absolutely, do what makes you feel comfortable. Just know that it can, as Nancy said, be a source of distraction for your audience if it doesn't look realistic, or if there's something that is cluttering the environment. So the blurred backgrounds, again, are okay, but think about the stakes of the situation that you're presenting and how important it is to project a professional image, to establish your credibility, and to reinforce the message that you're trying to communicate. Don't worry about those everyday one-on-ones. We're talking about those high-stakes presentations when you really need people to buy into your idea.
There's been a couple people too that have asked about, like, it looks like I'm standing and my camera's high, and it looks like you're sitting. And technically cameras should be at eye level. There's a whole section about that in the book. But as you know, we had some technical spazzing that happened right before. So I have a stand-up desk and I went like that. My camera's higher than it should be. So I'm going to lower that so people understand what best practice is. I tend to stand up. I tend to stand up because then I speak more from my diaphragm than when I sit down. But it's actually your preference about how you feel. You come across more. My gestures are a little bit more sound and solid than when I'm trying to avoid the arms of my chair. So it's really about how you feel more comfortable. And we both made different choices.
Yeah, we did. And y'all are right. I'm sitting down. And one of the reasons that I decided to do that was to frame the view and keep an aspect of a picture up above out of the frame, because some people have told me they're distracted by it. There's a big red sun above the blue ocean that's above my head. And so I was trying to be empathetic to my audience and remove that source of distraction by dropping my camera down until I can get around to rearranging my gallery wall so that image is not going to be a source of distraction for people. I think I need to go shopping.
I was thinking about what if we gave everyone a budget next year for them to design the wall behind them? I think we can do that and it'd be a tax write-off. So
I love it.
Hey, here's a question that I love. It's from another Patti Gamboa. It says, what is your process like, Patti? How do you start crafting your virtual presentations? I love that.
Very much the same. And of course, I'm preparing for this one. I went through that same exercise of thinking about all of you. I spent some time thinking about you, thinking about the kinds of questions that you would have, the concerns that you have, and making sure that the content that I was going to share would help to allay those concerns, answer those questions. So before I ever opened PowerPoint and started writing or pulling together graphics, I sat and thought about you. What was the move from, move to? What were the key things that I would need to say or do during the course of this virtual presentation? And we also made a choice to model specifically the interactive form of the presentation here to show you what that's like when you have two presenters and how their vocal variety creates contrast, as well as using more interaction with you, taking your questions all the way through rather than holding them to the end, and not delivering a very standard slide by slide by slide presentation, although you're seeing a slide right now. I can stop sharing it. But the point is, we didn't want to create sort of a linear monologue type webinar, which you all have sat through a million times. We wanted to do something a little bit different.
What's kind of fun is, and Patti, she's going to take her slide down, what we had done, which is made a point made in the book that's really important. And we're talking about presenting. Now, how you show up at your team meetings, how you show up in other situations. I mean, we have all those gags too. We're talking more about formal presentations you might use in a webinar and stuff like that. So one of the key points in here is there's a role for the moderator. So right now you're seeing Patti and I, we're kind of scrambling for Q&A. She's putting up her own slides, forgetting to take them down. So this is almost like a cautionary tale for why you should actually have a moderator and a producer. And that was all set up in a different tool that failed. So I think it's interesting. I think that would be interesting to show how we're modeling how not to do this, which is awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the presenter and how they show up. Like how does the presenter show up change in a virtual environment?
Well, we talked about some of these things already. I mean, first of all, we have to adjust our setup. And there were some questions about the technical setup I saw. And so we can touch on that real quickly when I share another slide. And you're going to see an awkward pause because I'm stopping sharing and starting sharing. But basically, we have made some changes to how we arrange our technology so that we can show up differently. And so this is a little schematic here is something similar to the setup I have at home and a lot of our virtual presenters at Duarte use. Well, they're presenters, but real human presenters, but sometimes they present virtually. And so what I have that I'm presenting from is I have a laptop that I'm using to share my slides. That's labeled extra display here, but it's really my main system. But I also have a secondary monitor, and that secondary monitor lets me put my notes. For instance, if I'm using a script, I put my notes down below the camera right here. That's the webcam that I'm using as well. And when I put my notes below that webcam, it makes it easier for me to quickly glance down and remind myself of a key point I want to make without breaking contact with the camera lens for too long, because the camera is your eyes to me. When I'm looking into that camera, I am making eye contact with you. And I want to do that more than less during a virtual presentation so that you know I'm being attentive to you, but also to increase that sense of virtual presence. And Martin had asked about this, to perform in a virtual presentation. What does that mean? I need to perform to the camera, just like your favorite TV show host does. They've learned how to connect through that camera lens. And that means that they have to change some things about the way that they communicate. That's why they have teleprompters that are close to the camera, and I put my notes as a prompter close to the camera here. And I do have an extra light, not a ring light in this case, but a lamp on my desk in addition to overhead lighting. So I've added some things to my setup so that the quality of the output is better for you. And I have an extra microphone here, a Yeti mic that I'm using, so the audio quality is better, but also to change where I look and adapt the way that I use my notes so that I can have better eye contact with all of you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the little pictures of happy people you're presenting to, or people with the expressions that you're wanting, that's what helped me kind of humanize looking at the little camera. I had to keep telling myself, there's humans here, because we keep looking at the faces on our screen instead of looking right there. So put little happy faces right around the camera. And I think the other thing is keeping the attention of the audience. We're trying to do that and model it here by having two voices. When I'm delivering a webinar, I'll make a squealy sound like, oh, look at my slides, like trying to lure people out of, look at this model, like, and try to grab people. And it should be a little bit more like an old timey radio show than a webinar, because the novelty will keep pulling people out of their inbox. So I was curious about your point of view of how to keep the attention of an audience too.
I love the old timey radio shows. We talked about that when we were writing our last book, Illuminate, and that we like to listen to. And why did we enjoy that? You can think of radio as kind of the original broadcast medium. It had to reach a lot of people, a lot of distracted people who were in their kitchens cooking, or in their cars driving, or in their bars drinking, or whatever it was that they were doing in their version of multitasking. And so radio show producers and talent learned that to catch the audience's attention, they had to use dynamic audio. They had to use a lot of variety in the voices and the sound effects and music to keep their audience engaged. And you can do the same, right? Especially if you tend toward monotone, or you need a little extra dynamism, maybe that's hard for you personally to produce, then bring in a co-presenter like Nancy who squeals, and then it's interesting for your audience.
Hey, Lisa Seaman wants to see your microphone, Patti. She's like, what is she using?
This
look
is
at that big old
Yeti Blue microphone, and I've got it right down here. And podcasters, YouTubers are big fans of mics like that. And there's other ways that you can kind of dial up or dial down your sound using the built-in features of the mic. But if you don't want to go that route, also, honestly, I'm going to say a good quality pair of earbuds with a built-in mic can get you pretty close, especially if there's nothing, in your clothing that it's going to bang against. It's going to make a lot of noise for your audience. But that's a pretty decent audio option. And the reason, though, I went with this route is because my voice is kind of quiet. And so I needed a sort of a higher powered microphone and something that's going to warm up my voice a little bit more than the average earbuds, which can sound kind of tinny. But don't do wireless because they're prone to crapping out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's some really good questions in here. There's so many. I feel like we need to offer to answer some of these questions either in articles or we'll mail something out. We have not done the drawing for the books yet either. I saw that question in here. But here's one from Tim Woodring I like. It's, hey, Patti, in your book, you talk about attention span and that going closer to 10 minutes is what you recommend. And your recommendation is to move content into chunks with interaction. My fear is that chunking presentations may result in presentations not having as much potential for an emotional arc and feeling more like little info bursts. I thought that was a really fair question. How do you address this for presenters who are accustomed to or shine in building more of an arc over time? I thought that was a good question.
Well, in the book, I go into more detail about structuring your content in ways that you can use emotional and analytical contrast. Of course, Nancy's book, Resonate, still applies. I mean, fundamentally, all the things that you do to make a presentation great also apply to making a virtual presentation great, just the extra challenge of distraction and the technology, right, that I talked about earlier, you have to overcome. And just because your content is chunked in small bits doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity to connect with your audience, even in one of those small bits. One of those small bits could be a personal story. And that can really tug on the heartstrings and build a rapport between you and your audience. If you tell a 3-minute anecdote about, for instance, how this book came to be, that would have been a different way for me to open than to share a stat with you. And that was a choice that I made. But it doesn't mean that your content has to be devoid of emotional appeal. And you can certainly use all the principles in Nancy's book, again, Resonate, to build more contrast into your presentation content and kind of tweak those heartstrings.
Yeah, I like this question too, because this one is a mysterious guy named Kenny. What emphasis should be placed for each layer of information? The presenter, the graphics, and the background. Like, is it 30% of one, 50% for another? Like, he's like, is there a ratio?
The golden mean, I love it.
And everyone wants a formula, which is awesome. And there's a lot of them in this book. Somebody else, we're talking about presenting virtual. Patty's #1 fan. So she wrote this amazing guidebook. It's the first guidebook in a series. And so, because someone else asked that. So Patti, is there a ratio, a percentage? How does that go?
I'm a gray girl, not a black and white girl. So a lot of times when people ask me for rules, I'm going to say it depends. And but as a general guide, personally, I believe that you are the primary focus for your presentation, not that the presentation exists for you. It exists to move your audience, right? So always, what your audience needs to hear is the first thing to navigate by when crafting your content, but you are the reliable narrator that they're going to listen to. So making sure that you show up prepared, that you know your content, that you're properly dressed, that you're properly rested so that you can give your best performance. To me, that's the first priority and where you should put a lot of your emphasis when you're preparing. Second is your graphics. And so if I were, I'm not going to give you a rule. I wanted to say almost like 70-30, 70-20-10, 70-10. How does that feel? But your graphics are important, certainly to amplify what you're saying. But I think sometimes people spend too much time obsessing on their slides, designing their slides, writing their slides, and not enough time preparing, rehearsing, making sure that they're comfortable and confident in delivering that content, or maybe their slides are fussy and overworked when a simple sketch might even get the idea across better. It's my opinion. And then third is the backdrop. Think of the backdrop as just another layer of emphasis to communicate another nuance quietly about you, or to visually reinforce your brand, for instance. But I wouldn't weight that more than 10 or 20%. That's my answer.
Setting or the stage. It depends. But yeah. So if you're doing a walkthrough, and if your story is in the background, then it would make sense. Otherwise, I would prioritize it in exactly the same way that Patti did. Yeah. So let's see. I'm looking at, it is hard. Somebody said, is it hard to look at the screen in the questions? Because I'm trying to smile at the camera the whole time. So with the additional, this is from Len, with the additional experience you've gained in the last 2 years presenting virtually, see what I just did there? He used your book title. If you could go back to 2019 and do things differently when it comes to presenting, what would that be?
I wouldn't talk as long.
You know what I noticed? Like, we've done webinars in the past, the chat and the Q&A are on fire. Pre 2019, people were passive. So I think people are actually like in there and they feel more comfortable putting their conversations in there.
Yeah,
but you're right.
I wouldn't talk as long. I mean, that's a little bit facetious, but in our recent survey, we found that people prefer shorter presentations. I mean, you can go 60 minutes or maybe even up to 90 minutes for a collaborative presentation, right? Like a working session, a workshop, something like that, where the rule of thumb is the more you involve the audience, the longer they'll stay.
Yeah.
Based on our research. So if you're delivering a linear presentation where you don't want to take questions and you're not giving them any chance to make their voice heard, less than 30 minutes is what people prefer, even as short as 20 to 15 minutes. There's a reason why TED Talks were that short.
Yeah. Less is better. So let's wind this sucker up then. I think way more is at stake in this medium, how people come across. People will get promoted, others won't. People's brands will move forward, others won't, based in how well they show up in this medium. So I think it's really, really important. So I'm hoping you can tell us more about how the medium is impacting individuals and people and the benefits of really working hard on gaining skills in this format.
Well, working with some of the biggest brands in the world and their virtual events, their virtual presentations, and even hybrid events. Somebody asked if we're doing them. Yeah, we are. And they're hard to do well. But businesses have seen huge benefits for going this route. And that's why I don't think it's going away anytime soon. At minimum, it'll continue in a hybrid form because it lets brands reach more people more quickly. It's a more inclusive medium because people don't all have to get on a plane and travel and spend hard-earned money to come to a physical event. They can join virtually for a lower cost. And so you can reach people who couldn't have afforded to get access to your content before. You can just reach other regions that you couldn't have reached more easily or as easily before. So the business benefits are increased reach, increased influence as your ideas spread to those more people. But personally, I couldn't be more excited about this medium as a way to give more people a voice, a platform to share their ideas with a global audience. And that means that your own star can rise, your career can take off. When you master this medium, you can get, I'll bet you're going to get more job offers. The bosses in your companies are going to take notice and say, this person deserves a promotion because they not only know how to communicate well, they know how to communicate and lead virtually, which is the way that people are working these days. So it's a powerful, powerful platform. I hope you master.
Yeah, and thank you. We have the books are available for sale everywhere books are. And Patti, you know how I'm your #1 fan, and congratulations. It's no small feat. And the book has tons of stuff in it. And we're all very proud of this work and proud of you. So thanks, everybody.
Well, and I just want to let you all know where you can find more information. So the book is a place for sure to go for more information, but we're also working on an online course right now, self-paced online video modules, aiming to launch it next month, December 2021. So if you want to get notified, that's a new word.
So
that's how creative I am. Notified when the online course is available, scan that little QR code and it'll take you to a place where you can register, sign up for more information.